The morning light came soft through my kitchen window, pale and heavy with dust. The air smelled faintly of rain and burnt toast. I remember the sound of the kettle, a low whistle, almost tired, before everything inside me began to shift. Claire was sitting at my table, her manicured fingers wrapped around the mug I'd given her last Christmas. She smiled that easy daughter smile that used to melt me. "Mom," she said, her voice smooth as cream, "starting next month, I'll manage your accounts." The words floated for a second, almost harmless. But then they settled in my chest like a stone dropped into deep water. I stared at the cup between my hands. A thin crack ran through the porcelain, catching the light like a scar. "Not everything that breaks can be glued back," I whispered once, maybe to the cup, maybe to myself. She kept talking, all calm and practical phrases, like security, stability, for your own good. And when she said those 4 words, "for your own good," it was as if time rewound, 30 years. My late husband had said the exact same thing the night he walked out with a suitcase. The air changed then. It got heavier. The heat from the coffee pressed against my skin. I didn't answer her right away. I just listened to the clock ticking above the stove. Each second sounded louder, sharper, until even breathing felt like an interruption. Claire reached across the table, her touch cool against my wrist. "Mom, you worry too much," she said. "You shouldn't have to handle all that anymore." I nodded slowly. "You think I can't?" She smiled, gentle, patient, rehearsed. "It's not about can't. It's about convenience. I'll take care of everything." "Take care of everything." The phrase echoed in the kitchen, bouncing off the empty chairs. My heart began to move differently inside my chest, slower but stronger, like it was waking from a long sleep. "Would you have said yes just to keep the peace?" If you've ever nodded to avoid the storm, you'll understand what I did next. I smiled back. "Of course, honey, I trust you." Her shoulders relaxed. She took another sip, satisfied. I could see it in her eyes, the quiet confidence of someone who believed she'd just gained control. She stood, kissed my forehead, mechanical and quick. "You'll see," she said. "This is for the best." When the door closed behind her, the house fell into a silence that hummed, a silence that remembered. I sat there for a long while, listening to the creak of the old floorboards, the slow cooling of the kettle, the faint ticking that never stopped. The room smelled like coffee and something else, something metallic like fear. In that stillness, I looked at the cup again. The crack had widened slightly, as if the heat itself had deepened it. I thought about how things break quietly, without noise, without drama. Sometimes you only notice when it's too late to fix them. I thought about Claire's face, how her kindness had been replaced by efficiency. I wondered when the shift happened. Was it when she married Evan, or when I paid her student loans, or maybe when I stopped asking for visits and started thanking her for them instead? There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from realizing the person you raised has stopped seeing you as a mother and started seeing you as an obligation. It's a cold that no blanket can touch. Silence remembers. I murmured the words thick in my throat, and it did. The walls, the floor, the very air in that kitchen remembered every meal, every birthday, every night. I'd stayed up sewing her dresses when money was thin, especially the pink dress, the one she wore to her first dance. I'd saved for weeks to buy the fabric, then stitched until my fingers bled. She looked like a dream that night. "Only special people get pink," I'd told her. She'd smiled and believed me. Maybe that was the last time she truly did. As the morning stretched toward noon, light shifted across the table. Dust floated like slow snow. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered, more bone than warmth. But behind the fatigue, something stirred. Heat. Not the kind that burns, but the kind that keeps you alive through winter. I realized I wasn't confused. I wasn't weak. I was being tested. Maybe she thought my silence meant surrender. Maybe she forgot who taught her how to survive on almost nothing. Who turned canned beans and coupons into a life. Would you have seen it too, the warning hidden in her kindness? Tell me below if you've ever smiled while your heart screamed enough. I reached for the crack in the cup again, tracing it with my thumb. The line felt warm, alive, like a vein. "Not everything that breaks can be glued back," I said once more, slower this time. "And yet maybe some things aren't meant to be fixed at all." When I finally stood, the chair scraped softly against the tile. Outside, the clouds had gathered thick and gray. A storm was coming. You could taste it in the air. I poured what was left of the coffee down the sink and washed the cup carefully, though the stain inside refused to fade. Then I placed it upside down on the drying rack, water pooling around its rim. From the window, I could see Claire's car turning the corner, disappearing behind the magnolia trees. She didn't look back. She never did anymore. The house exhaled around me long and low, like it had been holding its breath too. That morning, something in me cracked like that coffee cup. The house warmed first in the kitchen the way it always did on Fridays. The oven let out a soft hum, and garlic met butter in a small, bright sizzle. Steam fogged the window above the sink, then cleared in slow breaths, like the glass was thinking. My hands moved without asking permission. Rice-rinsed chicken, salted greens snapped clean with tiny pops. I laid out the good plates even though no one ever noticed. The clock over the stove kept that stubborn beat. Tick, breathe, tick, breathe. The air held a tired sweetness of onions and heat. Somewhere inside the hush, a thought stood up straight and asked a quiet question. Fridays used to mean love. They let themselves in like always right at 7, right between commercials and sunset. Evan's cologne reached the doorway before his words did. Claire's heels clicked their careful music across my old linoleum, bright and brisk, like they owned the rhythm and the floor. "Smells wonderful," he said, already glancing toward the table. Claire kissed my cheek in a way that landed but didn't stay. We moved through the motions as if our bodies had learned a dance we never chose. My hands poured water. Their fingers scrolled news. The TV remained dark. We didn't need the noise. The silence was plenty. Silence remembers. We ate with small sounds. Forks, glass rims. Chairs nudged a little too close, a little too late. They talked about flights and stocks and a restaurant where bread came to the table in tiny cloth bags. I nodded and smiled the way you do when you do not exist in the story being told. "How's work?" I asked once, and Evan answered for Claire, folding her day into 2 neat phrases. She didn't look at me when he spoke. She adjusted her napkin and checked a message. The heat from the oven leaked around my ankles, familiar and loyal. I found my breath and let it go slowly. "Would you have felt the drift, too, the way attention leaves like tide?" "There's a new fund," Mom Claire said at last, remembering I was present. "Everyone my age is doing it." She took a sip, eyes on Evan. "It's smart to let people who know better handle things." Her spoon tapped the bowl. A little bell, soft and sure. I thought of last week and the week before and the one before that. Same lines with different toppings. I placed the bread between them like a peace offering no one asked for. Only special people I used to whisper to her long ago when I packed little pink lunches and folded note hearts. It wasn't about bread then. It was about seeing. Who was seeing me now? When they finished, I reached for stories that used to matter. The first peach pie of summer, the old neighbor's azaleas, the church raffle that finally bought new hymnals. Small things with real weather in them. They floated for a second, then sank before reaching shore. "We should get going," Evan said, checking the time though no one had asked it to hurry. Early morning. Claire stood already smoothing a dress that didn't wrinkle. She set her plate on the counter like you return a tray at a cafeteria. "You're amazing, Mom," she said. That used to mean I was loved. Tonight it meant the meal cleared itself. I kept my seat after the door closed, hands flat to the table to feel its heartbeat. The house held their absence the way a coat holds perfume. It wasn't bad, just true. I listened to the clock until it sounded like footsteps leaving the same hallway for the 1,000th time. There is a kind of loneliness you only meet after feeding people you adore. It has the shape of a chair. No one chooses the cool of a fork placed back too gently. If you felt this kind of silence, tell me below. We shouldn't have to name it to survive it. Still, naming is a kind of heat, and I was learning how to be warm again. I stood, and the room remembered me. The sink took the plates. Water ran the way a river runs after weather steady and resigned. I stacked their glasses upside down and watched beads gather at the lips, then slip away. In the reflection of the dark window, I saw a woman who had stitched a dress from cheap satin because a little girl asked for pink. I saw the night we pinned the hem and the way that child spun dizzy with brightness, asking who gets pink. "Mama, only special people," I told her. "Only special people." I set the dishcloth aside and felt the ache of that memory like a seam that never truly lays flat. How many Fridays does it take to understand the math of a ritual I had been paying a bill I never agreed to with ingredients and stories and hours? The interest had become invisible. Obligation accrues quietly compounding in size and small erasures. Somewhere between the salad and the door, I realized I had underlined myself out of the paragraph. Not tonight. Not again. Enough. The word didn't arrive with fireworks. It came on a plate of crumbs and the soft squeak of a cabinet hinge. But it came with heat. And heat in a woman my age is life returning to its rightful owner's bone-eye spine. I wiped the table slow, then slower inside the circle where plates had been. My hand moved as if I were erasing a chalkboard. Lessons gone. I could still hear Evan's fork scrape the edge. I could still see Claire's thumb skimming her phone like a flat stone across water. Would you have done the same, waited, watched, weighed the air? Share this if you believe silence deserves a voice. I turned off the oven and felt the kitchen exhale. No applause, no verdict. Just the clean click of a decision made at body temperature. Fridays used to mean love. Maybe that was true once. Maybe love had worn the habit and borrowed the hour. But love, when it is healthy, does not require a reservation I must always keep. It does not call seconds before arrival and ask if the table is set. Love asks how you are and waits for an answer that takes time. Love helps lift the heavy pot, then laughs when steam fogs both faces like weather. Love, my kind of love, dries the plates with you and tells a new story right there, hands wet, feet tired, hearts full. The room cooled as the stove lost its glow. I opened the window to the night and let the crickets say what needed saying. The floor sighed under my heels, then grew still. I pressed a fingertip to the wood and felt beneath the grain the faintest hum. It was my own pulse meeting me where I stood. The pink dress hung in a distant closet somewhere between girl and shadow. I couldn't wear it for her anymore, but I could keep the fabric safe. I could stitch a different seam for myself. A boundary looks simple until you touch it. Then you feel the workmanship. I turned off the last light and stood in the doorway holding the quiet like warm bread. Air moved softly across my forearms, and the night carried a clean scent of rain. Tomorrow could still be beautiful. The table would still be mine. If you've been here too, if your Fridays grew teeth, you're not alone. Follow family revenge stories for more real healing. We will set out chairs for one another, and we will ask the question that opens every good meal. How are you really? Fridays used to mean love. Maybe they will again, someday. But not like this. Not as duty disguised with napkins and praise that vanishes at the door. The kitchen will remember tonight, the way a scar remembers both wound and closing. I will remember too, with heat that doesn't burn, and a voice that no longer waits to be invited. Love shouldn't taste like routine. The morning felt strange before I even opened my eyes. The kind of stillness that presses against your ribs and makes you count the seconds. The light through the curtains looked faded, like it had already given up on shining. The house didn't hum the way it used to. No refrigerator buzz, no television murmur, just quiet, heavy quiet. Silence has weight. I could feel it resting on my chest like an extra blanket I hadn't asked for. That week I'd done something no one expected of me. I sold it all: the sofa, the TV, the dining set, even the little bookshelf by the window. Each item left a pale ghost on the walls or floor, the outline of a life once crowded. When the last piece rolled out through the front door, I stood in the middle of the room, breathless. It wasn't sadness, it was clarity, like finally seeing the bones of a house you thought was made of love, but was really built of habit. The plan wasn't about money. I had enough for my groceries, my utilities, the small things. What I didn't have was proof. Proof of how far they'd drifted. Proof that love had been replaced by convenience. You see, sometimes silence can be louder than words, but emptiness has its own kind of truth. When Friday came, the routine played itself almost faithfully. The sound of their car pulling up doors, slamming, laughter spilling out before they even reached the porch. I waited in the kitchen doorway. My heart tapped softly against my ribs, not from fear, from knowing what was about to happen. The moment Claire stepped inside, she froze. Her eyes darted around the hollow room like a searchlight gone wild. "What did you do, Mom?" Her voice cracked on the word Mom. "Where's everything?" I met her stare, steady, calm. "I needed some cash," I said. Evan stood behind her, hands in his pockets, scanning the walls like he'd lost something he owned. "You sold it, all of it." I nodded. "All of it." Claire let out a bitter laugh. "This isn't normal. You need help. You can't just—" "I already have help," I said, myself. The silence that followed was thick enough to lean on. You could hear the echo of her breathing bounce off bare walls. If you've ever tested someone's love by taking away the comfort, you'll understand what that silence sounded like. It wasn't concern. It was outrage. Not "are you okay," but "how could you?" When you strip a home of its furniture, you strip the illusion too. The illusion that a mother's love is a given no matter how it's treated. They didn't stay long. Claire muttered something about dinner reservations. Evan checked his watch, pretending the whole thing was beneath him. I watched them leave their reflection passing across the empty window. Then the door closed, and the house swallowed the noise like a body taking a long breath after years underwater. I walked over to the window seat, the only thing I hadn't sold. It was built into the frame, too stubborn to move. I sat there where the light came in soft and tilted, touching the dust in long stripes. The fabric was worn, the cushion thin, but it held me. Across the street, Mrs. Hammond was watering her hydrangeas. The sound of the hose, the faint smell of wet dirt, small proof that life continued outside my little experiment. Would you have done the same? Would you dare to test the silence? Sometimes love becomes so transactional, you need to see the ledger in their eyes to believe it. I thought of the nights when Claire was small, curled against my shoulder, her heartbeat a quiet drum under her pajamas. I used to whisper silence, remembers darling, even when people don't. She never asked what I meant. Maybe she thought it was a bedtime spell. Maybe it was. Now all these years later, the same silence sat beside me, older, colder, but honest. It remembered everything I'd given, everything that was taken for granted, everything that was no longer mine to lose. That afternoon, I made tea for one. The kettle screamed and I let it. The sound filled the hollow rooms like a declaration. The mug felt heavier without conversation around it. I sipped slowly, listening to the air shift as the house adjusted to its new body lighter, freer bear. If you've felt this kind of emptiness, tell me below. You'll know it not by the noise it makes, but by how it teaches you to breathe again. Evening fell soft and gold. Through the window, the trees outside bent slightly under the wind, their leaves whispering secrets only the wind could keep. The chair beneath me creaked with every small movement, a reminder that even silence has motion if you stay still enough. I traced my fingers along the window frame over the faint grooves of old paint. I thought of Claire's voice, the sharpness, the disbelief. Maybe this was the first time she'd looked at me and seen a woman instead of a service. Maybe discomfort is the beginning of understanding. Silence has weight, I whispered, and sometimes you have to feel it to know it's there. I didn't regret the sale. I didn't miss the TV or the couch. What I missed was something I'd never really had a home filled with presence, not performance. The stars came out early that night, soft points against a velvet sky. I left the light off and sat there in the dark, the window reflecting my face back at me, older, yes, but not smaller. There's a kind of peace that comes only when everything else is gone. I closed my eyes and let the stillness settle into the room, into my bones, into whatever was left of me. Sometimes silence is the loudest truth. The rain that night came sideways, soft but relentless, the kind that soaked through screens and memory. It hit the old window panes like a metronome, steady and cruel. I stood in the kitchen holding a cup of tea gone cold, staring at the photograph propped against the wall. Our wedding picture edges, curled colors, fading smiles preserved in a lie. The air smelled like dust and wilted flowers, a room frozen in someone else's dream. Promises fade slower than pictures. I learned that too late. It was the 70s when he left a Thursday near dusk. I still remember the exact rhythm of the door closing, the way the echo sat in my chest like a swallowed stone. Claire was 2. She didn't understand that the sound meant forever. She sat in her pink pajamas, clapping her tiny hands, saying, "Daddy, go bye-bye." And I nodded because I couldn't find words. The truth was a sharp object, and I was already bleeding from too many places. I got a job the next week, secretary by day, cleaner by night. 2 shifts, 1 body. I used to joke that I slept on buses and lived in lunch breaks. The office smelled of ink and typewriter ribbons. The cleaning job smelled of bleach and sweat. Sometimes at 2 in the morning, I'd look at my reflection in the subway glass and not recognize her, that woman with cracked hands and mascara that never fully washed off. But every morning, I came home to Claire. Her hair wild, her laughter loud, her arms reaching for me like I was something worth holding. I'd press my face into her shoulder and whisper, "Only special people get mornings like this." She'd giggle, not knowing I was promising myself to keep her world bright, even if mine turned gray. I bought her things I couldn't afford: shoes too nice for our neighborhood birthday cakes, too tall for our fridge. I wanted her to walk through the world like she belonged in every room. I wanted her to never feel the hunger that once sat inside me. She'll never know struggle, I used to tell myself, counting coins under the kitchen light. And she didn't. But the price of keeping her whole was breaking myself quietly. I remember one winter when I sold my coat to pay for her school trip. I told her it was lost at the laundromat. She hugged me and said, "It's okay, Mommy." That was love, pure and clean. And maybe that's why I kept giving even when it hurt. Because mothers confuse giving with existing. Years went by like a long exhale. Claire grew taller, quieter, sharper around the edges. She wanted less to do with stories, more to do with the world outside. I used to wait for her at the window after school, that same window where her father had walked away. Some evenings she'd come home, drop her bag, and say, "I'm eating with friends." No hug, no question. Just the sound of independence, heavy and proud. Would you have done the same? Kept giving even as the warmth faded. If you've ever built your life around someone else's comfort, tell me below. You'll know what I mean when I say love can be an invisible debt. One night she came home angry. I don't even remember why. Maybe about curfew or money or a boy. She shouted things that still live in the walls of that house. "You don't understand anything. You've never had a life." And she was right. I hadn't. My life had been her shadow moving when she moved silent when she spoke. I didn't answer that night. I just watched her storm into her room, the door slamming like punctuation. After she fell asleep, I walked back into the kitchen. The house smelled faintly of burnt rice, and the cheap candles I used to hide the scent of exhaustion. I looked at our wedding photo, the same one that sits on my counter now. His smile, my eyes still naive enough to believe that forever meant the same thing to both of us. Promises fade slower than pictures, but they fade all the same. Sometimes I wonder if she inherited his leaving. That slow erosion of empathy, that quiet self-priority disguised as strength. When she looks at me now, all wrinkles and history, maybe she sees the ghost of what she fears becoming. And instead of reaching out, she recoils. I can't blame her. Not fully. I built her pedestal from my bones. I polished her future with my hours. I gave her everything and taught her nothing about gratitude. Because gratitude grows best in soil where nothing comes easy. And I made sure her ground was too soft to learn that. There are nights still when I trace the faded edges of that photograph. The paper feels thin, brittle, like it might crumble if I breathe too hard. And I think of how love in all its glory and grief is just as fragile. You hold it too tightly, it breaks. Hold it too loosely, it fades. Either way, you end up holding air. If silence remembers, then maybe this old picture does too. It remembers the vows, the fight, the sound of the suitcase zipper. It remembers the woman who refused to give up even when everything she touched turned temporary. The rain eased toward morning. The air carried that earthy, clean smell, the scent of endings disguised as renewal. I turned off the light, leaving the room in a soft gray haze. The photograph leaned against the wall again, half in shadow, half in light. I walked past it slow and steady, the floor creaking under each step like an old friend. Maybe love doesn't die. Maybe it just changes hands. From mother to daughter, from dream to reality, from promise to lesson. I gave her everything. Maybe that was my first mistake. The afternoon light was sharp that day, a kind of gold that exposes, not warms. It slanted across my dining table, catching dust motes that moved like slow confessions. The house was too quiet. Even the clock seemed to hesitate between seconds. That's when I heard the car door outside, the sound of her heels tapping quick against the pavement. I knew before she even stepped in, Claire only came during daylight, now never evenings, never unplanned. She walked in with a folder clutched tight against her chest. Beige, crisp. The kind of folder that smelled of ink and fresh paper, not love. She smiled that polite, professional kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Mom," she said, "I brought something to make things easier for you." Her voice was sweet, practiced, like she was presenting a gift. I motioned for her to sit. She laid the folder on the table, sliding it toward me as if it might break if pushed too hard. I looked at her hands, manicured, steady, confident. Mine older veined, trembling just a little. I opened it. Inside were documents perfectly aligned. The first page had bold letters across the top, financial authorization. My name printed there in neat dark ink. My breath caught for a moment. "It just means I can help manage things," she said quickly. "Your bills, your bank stuff, anything overwhelming. So you don't have to worry." I nodded slowly. The paper smelled faintly of toner, and something else deceit has a scent if you've lived long enough to recognize it. As she talked, her words blurred into the rhythm of her earrings brushing her hair. The sunlight hit the edge of her face, making her look older, more like me. For a fleeting second, I saw the little girl who used to crawl into my bed after thunderstorms. "Only special people can sleep through thunder," I'd whisper. She'd laugh, eyes half closed. That memory stung like an old bruise. Now she was talking about efficiency, convenience, responsibility. But the tone was off. There was something in her eyes, hunger dressed in concern. I started reading, slowly. Each line, each clause, each gentle legal trick designed to make surrender look like care. "It says you'd have full access," I murmured, pretending to trace a typo. "Withdrawals, signatures, transfers." She shifted in her seat, straightening her back. "Yes, but only if necessary. You know I'd never use it unless you asked." I smiled faintly. Of course not. Inside, a heat began to build, quiet, disciplined heat. The kind that doesn't burn the skin, only the illusions. I turned another page. The small print was dense, packed like secrets. Durable power of attorney, full authorization in case of incapacity, words so neat they could cut. Small print hides big traps, always has. "I'll think about it," I said softly, closing the folder. "Maybe a few days." She looked disappointed, not wounded, just inconvenienced. "I really thought it would make you feel safer." "Safety," I said, still smiling, "comes in many forms." She laughed lightly, almost forced. "Don't overthink it, Mom. It's just paperwork." Just paperwork. That phrase hung in the air like a cobweb catching light, delicate, invisible weighting. When she left, the silence returned thicker this time, the kind that fills every corner, stretching across rooms like an old quilt. I sat there with the folder in front of me. The edges of the paper curled slightly under the afternoon heat. The air smelled like lemon cleaner and unease. Would you have signed it? Would you have trusted the child you raised, the one you gave everything to, if you've ever questioned love hidden behind good intentions? Tell me below. I thought of the years when my signature meant permission for school trips, medical bills, graduation forms. Back then, her name was always beneath mine, smaller in pencil. Now her signature hovered above mine, printed in ink. When did care become conditional? When did love require witnesses and notarization? The light outside began to fade. Through the window, the trees bent under a slow wind, their leaves whispering things I couldn't quite catch. I stayed at the table, the papers untouched, until dusk painted the room in gray-blue. The house felt watchful, like it was holding its breath. I reached for the folder once more, running my fingers along the embossed letterhead. Every letter looked too sharp, every sentence too rehearsed. Somewhere between the lines, her intentions glimmered faint but unmistakable. Not concern, control. The silence between us had changed flavor. It wasn't distance anymore, it was strategy. That night I made tea I didn't drink. The kettle hissed and clicked, then stilled. I carried the folder to my desk, turned on the lamp, and began to read again, slower this time, eyes tracing every curve of every clause. Somewhere between the words authorization and best interest, I felt something inside me harden. Enough. Not the words said out loud, just felt deep and calm, like an earthquake no one else can hear. Small print hides big traps, but it also reveals the truth if you know where to look. I remembered her face at the table, poised, patient, almost rehearsed, and behind her eyes the glint of something colder, maybe ambition, maybe fear, maybe both. I wanted to believe she didn't mean harm, that this was just care gone practical. But love shouldn't feel like a signature you regret giving. If silence remembers, then this table would whisper everything it witnessed that afternoon. Her confidence. My caution, the air between us heavy with something unspoken. I turned off the light and sat in the half-dark, the folder still on my lap. Outside, a lone car passed headlights cutting through the blinds for a brief moment before vanishing into night. The papers seemed to glow faintly like they were breathing. The clock ticked once, twice, slow and deliberate. That night, I didn't sleep. I started reading between the lines. The morning started soft, too soft, the kind of quiet that feels like a setup. The air smelled faintly of rain and old coffee. I was standing in line at the bank holding my small leather purse, the one Claire gave me 3 Christmases ago. The floor was cold marble smooth under my shoes, echoing every shuffle and sigh. I watched the red light above the counter blink now, serving number 34. When my turn came, I sat down at the small desk across from a young woman with kind eyes and nervous hands. Her name tag said Julia. She smiled professional and sweet. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" "I just need a copy of my recent statement," I said. "Something feels off." I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way silence had changed flavor in my house, cautious, like it was hiding something. Julia clicked on her keyboard, the sound like tapping glass. A few seconds later, her eyes narrowed. "There was a withdrawal last week," she said softly. $1,500 from a different branch. My heart stumbled. A different branch. She nodded. "Yes, ma'am. It says it was done in person." The air thickened around me. The hum of printers, the chatter, the clicking, all of it blurred into one long drone. I reached into my bag for my wallet. The card was still there, tucked neatly between an old photograph and a receipt from the grocery store. "That's impossible," I whispered. "I didn't make any withdrawals." Julia looked at me gently, the way people do when they're afraid to tell you something you already know. Sometimes family members help out without asking. "Would you like to file a dispute?" Her words fell heavy. I felt my stomach turn cold. "Family," I repeated, letting the syllables roll around my tongue like something foreign. "No, not yet." The memory came quick and sharp. Last week. Claire, sitting in my kitchen legs, crossed her phone face down, saying, "Mom, you really should rest more. Let me handle things for a bit." I had gone upstairs to nap. My purse had been on the table. She'd stayed downstairs catching up on emails. I didn't want to believe it. Not yet. So I asked Julia to print the statement. The paper slid out of the machine, warm and humming like a living thing. I scanned the lines, each transaction like a heartbeat. Gas, groceries, electricity. And then it stood there black and blunt. Withdrawal, $1,500 in person, downtown branch. Numbers don't lie. The truth never does. It just waits for you to be ready. Would you have believed it? Would you have trusted your child over the evidence? If you've ever had to choose between love and truth, tell me below. I folded the paper once, then twice. My hand shook, not from age, but from betrayal finding its shape. The world outside the glass door looked unchanged. People walked by holding coffee cups, smiling, carrying groceries, unaware that someone's trust had just died quietly under fluorescent light. I thanked Julia, forced a smile, and walked out. The air outside hit me like a slap, sharp, metallic, full of exhaust. I stood on the curb, gripping the statement so tightly the ink smudged slightly under my thumb. For years, I'd told myself Claire was just busy, distracted, caught up in her own life. That she still loved me, even if she forgot to say it. But love doesn't need reminders, only attention. And lately, her attention had always pointed toward money. I started walking home slow, letting the sound of my footsteps fill the space where Faith used to live. Back home, the house greeted me with the same stillness it always did. I put the paper on the kitchen counter beside a cold cup of tea and sat down. The same chair, the same table, but everything looked different now. I looked at the paper again. My name in bold, her betrayal in black ink. Numbers don't lie. For a moment I thought about calling her, asking, confronting, but the words that came to mind felt small, powerless against the truth already printed in front of me. What could I say that would make her admit it? What could she say that would make it hurt less? The silence stretched long and merciless. I could almost hear it breathing. I remember teaching her about money when she was small, counting coins on the kitchen floor, telling her that honesty was the one currency that never lost value. She'd giggled, holding the shiny quarters to her cheek, saying they felt cold but lucky. Now I wondered what happened to that little girl, the one who used to ask if she could buy me something just because. Love becomes complicated when it starts keeping receipts. I stared at the statement again. The numbers didn't move. They sat there like small, permanent scars. I knew then something had shifted between us, something that couldn't be undone with apologies or explanations. When blood learns to steal, it's no longer blood. Its inheritance gone sour. If silence remembers, this one would remember too. The way the air thickened in that bank. The way my hands trembled over proof I never wanted to see. By evening, the sky turned the color of old paper, pale gray, tired. I stood by the window watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. The house felt colder, even with the heat still humming. Maybe trust isn't something we lose all at once. Maybe it leaks drop by drop until one day the cup is empty and you're still holding it, waiting for it to fill again. I walked back to the table, looked at the bank statement one last time, and folded it neatly into an envelope. I didn't know what I'd do next, but I knew I couldn't unsee what was there. Numbers don't lie. The lies live in people. And that night when I turned off the lights, my hands were shaking, but my eyes were clear. I left the bank with shaking hands but clear eyes. The house felt colder that morning, not from weather, but from knowing too much. Light came through the curtains in thin, sharp lines like truth, sneaking in when you'd rather stay blind. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Claire once did her homework, a pot of tea cooling beside me. The steam rose faintly, curling in slow, thoughtful shapes. Everything was still. No music, no clock ticking, not even the fridge humming. Just silence, heavy, watching. Truth needs evidence, not noise. That thought came to me like a whisper I didn't remember thinking. So I began. I pulled the folders from the drawer, the one where I kept bank slips and utility bills, all those small proofs of an ordinary life. One by one, I laid them out. Statements, receipts, notes written in my careful cursive. My hands no longer shook. They moved with purpose, steady, precise, the hands of the woman I used to be. I made piles, dated them, cross-checked every withdrawal, every charge. I highlighted the ones that didn't belong, the ones she thought I'd never notice. Claire's name wasn't on any of them, but her fingerprints were all over the pattern. As I worked, the light shifted from gold to gray to the soft blue of early evening. I didn't move much, only to refill the kettle. The sound of boiling water became a kind of metronome, marking time in a day that no longer felt real. I found old emails, 2 bank notifications she must have thought I couldn't read, small lies wrapped in polite words. I printed them, lined them neatly, each one proof that silence once again had remembered what people hoped it would forget. The morning light hit the window differently that day, too harsh, too white. It bounced off the phone screen on my kitchen table, lighting up words I never imagined I'd see from my own daughter. The smell of burnt toast lingered in the air, but even that felt distant, buried under the weight of that single post. Sometimes mothers become toxic. 8 words. That's all it took. 8 words to turn decades of love into poison for strangers to taste. I scrolled. Hundreds of comments followed, hearts, tears, applause, pity. People I'd never met calling her brave. Women cheering, "Good for you, Claire," men typing, "Cut her off, no one deserves that." The world loves a victim, especially a pretty one. In the age of lies, truth has no followers. I set the phone down slowly, feeling its heat against my palm. For a long while, I didn't move. The clock ticked. The kettle hissed the sounds of a house pretending everything was fine. But something inside me had cracked again. I didn't cry. Not this time. I'd already buried my tears somewhere between the bank and the lawyer's office. Now only silence remained, cold, patient listening. Would you have spoken back? Would you have defended yourself to a mob that only wanted blood? If you've ever been painted wrong by someone you loved, tell me below. I made tea. That's what I do when the world turns cruel. I measure, pour weight. Ritual gives you time to think. As I stirred the cup, the spoon hit porcelain, a small, steady rhythm that sounded almost like defiance. My lawyer had called earlier that morning. The case was moving forward. The court had accepted the evidence. Claire didn't know yet, but she would soon. The irony was almost poetic. While she was busy collecting sympathy online, the truth was quietly collecting her signatures, withdrawals, forged documents, the things that never lie. I opened the curtains wider. The neighborhood looked the same, mail trucks, barking dogs, life moving on. But I knew the wind had shifted. Somewhere out there, justice was waking up. Later that evening, a friend from church called. "Margaret," she said carefully, "I saw what Claire posted. Are you all right?" I smiled into the phone, my voice calm. "I'm fine, Ellen. Let them talk. The law doesn't need hashtags." It felt strange hearing myself sound so composed. For years, I'd mistaken silence for weakness. But silence isn't empty. It's full of the things people refuse to hear. Still, the words from her post haunted me. Sometimes mothers become toxic. I replayed them like a song stuck in my head. Toxic. As if love that sacrifices becomes poison when it stops being convenient. The next day I went out for groceries. At the checkout line, 2 women whispered nearby. I caught fragments. That's her, the one her daughter posted about. I didn't flinch. I just looked up, met their eyes, and smiled a slow, knowing smile. Because by then I understood something they didn't. Opinions change faster than truth. The investigation moved quietly. My lawyer handled everything. Emails, interviews, financial tracing. He'd said, just keep living your life. The truth doesn't rush. It arrives. So I waited, patiently. Weeks passed. Then one afternoon Daniel called. His tone was different this time. Firm, certain. Mrs. Lee, he said, they found the transfers. The prosecutor's office is preparing charges. It's moving forward. I didn't speak right away. The words took a moment to land. Thank you, I said finally, my voice low. I suppose the internet won't clap for this. He chuckled softly. No, but the record will. After the call, I sat in my armchair by the window. The same chair that had watched so much laughter, loneliness, long silences. The light outside was warm and golden, softening everything it touched. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel hostile. It felt honest. If you've ever been slandered publicly but stood quietly anyway, share this. Sometimes the loudest truth is the one that doesn't shout. That night, curiosity led me back online. The post was still there, but different now. Fewer hearts, more questions, comments like, wait, what's really happening? She lied. I heard there's a case. The tide was turning, slowly, reluctantly, but truth was beginning to breathe again. I clicked away and closed the laptop. I didn't need to see her unravel. I only needed peace. I thought of something my late husband used to say, when life tested us, justice isn't fast, but it doesn't forget its way home. He was right. Outside, the rain began gentle at first, then heavier. It tapped against the windows, rhythmic and cleansing. I made another cup of tea and watched the water trail down the glass. Each drop carried a kind of mercy. The world was still loud. Digital noise, opinions, outrage, but none of it mattered anymore. My silence had done its work. It had waited, endured, and spoken at last. In the age of lies, truth has no followers, but it doesn't need any. It only needs time. The next morning, the phone buzzed again, a message from a stranger. Mrs. Lee. I believed her. I'm sorry. I stared at it for a long while. Then I smiled softly, almost sadly. People forget that apologies don't erase wounds, they just remind you where they were. I put the phone away and stepped outside. The air smelled clean, the sky a pale blue streaked with morning light. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone's mother or victim or story. I felt like myself, quiet, steady, alive. She won the comments. I won the truth. Would you have done the same? Sat in that quiet gathering? What someone you love left behind in deceit? If you've ever had to turn pain into paperwork, tell me below. At one point I paused, looked around the room. Every surface told a story. The table with its faint knife marks from years of family dinners. The window still bearing a faint crack from a storm 2 winters ago. The couch where she once curled up in that pink dress I sewed for her 6th birthday. It struck me how much of motherhood lives in the background unnoticed, invisible, yet impossible to erase. I opened the drawer again, pulled out an old wooden box. It smelled faintly of cedar and thyme, the same box that once held photographs, small souvenirs, the wedding ring I no longer wore. I emptied it, lined it with fresh paper, and began placing each document inside, slowly, carefully, like laying flowers on a grave. This wasn't grief, this was preparation. When you've lived long enough, you learn that heartbreak has a rhythm. First comes the silence, then comes the evidence, then comes the plan. I labeled each folder, made duplicates, marked envelopes in red ink. My handwriting was slow, deliberate, the kind you use when you know someone will read it after you're gone. Around dusk, I lit a single lamp. Its glow fell over the papers like a halo, soft but unflinching. I sat back watching the pile grow thicker, heavier, undeniable. Proof doesn't ask for belief. It only asks to be seen. There was no anger now, just a strange kind of clarity, the kind that comes after the storm has already taken what it wanted. I thought about the woman I'd been, the one who stayed quiet, who trusted too easily, who mistook politeness for peace. That woman had been buried under years of habit and duty. But as I sealed the last envelope, I felt her rise again, not young, not soft, but alive. I remembered my first years after her father left. I had nothing then but instinct. I learned to survive through detail, reading contracts twice, asking questions no one wanted to answer. Life had trained me once before, and apparently it wasn't done teaching. I smiled a little at the thought. Truth needs evidence, not noise. The words settled in the air like dust caught in sunlight. I whispered them again, softer this time, as if repeating a prayer. It was almost midnight when I locked the box. The click of the key echoed through the room, small, final, satisfying. I traced the grain of the wood with my fingers, feeling its weight, its quiet authority. That box now held everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained back. I placed it under the bed beside the old suitcase, where I kept birth certificates, photographs, and a few keepsakes too painful to throw away. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, exhaled, and listened. The house breathed again. The silence had changed, no longer heavy, no longer cruel, just still respectful. If you've ever rebuilt yourself in secret, if you've ever gathered strength between teacups and legal papers, share this moment with me, because women like us, we don't announce our comebacks. We prepare them. I glanced at the mirror across the room. The woman staring back wasn't defeated. She was calculating, measured and calm. The lines on her face no longer looked like proof of age. They looked like maps. Sometimes survival doesn't look like fighting. It looks like organizing. I stood, turned off the light, and walked toward the window. Outside, the night sky stretched quiet and deep stars scattered like small truths waiting to be found. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel old. I felt ready. I wasn't weak. I was just preparing. The air inside the office smelled of paper, lemon polish, and quiet judgment, the kind of stillness that made every sound, the ticking clock, the creak of leather, feel deliberate. Afternoon light slid through half-closed blinds, slicing the room into stripes of gold and gray. I sat there small against the wide mahogany desk, the weight of my wooden box resting on my lap. My fingers traced its edge, feeling the faint ridges where time had dried the varnish. Across from me, Daniel Kim, the lawyer, adjusted his glasses and studied the documents I'd spent weeks gathering. His movements were calm, meticulous. A man who handled truth the way a surgeon handles a blade. He looked up after a long silence. "Mrs. Lee," he said, his voice steady, not unkind. "This qualifies as financial elder abuse." The words landed like a slow explosion. I thought I was ready to hear them, but something in my chest tightened. A word like abuse doesn't echo, it clings. It doesn't accuse the act alone. It accuses the love that allowed it. He continued explaining statutes, options, procedures, but all I heard was the sound of my pulse, slow and heavy, keeping time with the clock on his wall. When he paused, I finally spoke. "If I do this, it means I'm turning against my own daughter." He folded his hands, leaned slightly forward. "It means you're protecting yourself, even from someone you love." The phrase stayed in the air, still and honest. Protecting yourself. I'd done that all my life, from poverty, from heartbreak, from silence. But never from her. Never from the child I once wrapped in a pink dress and told only special people get to wear this. Would you have done it? Could you have looked at your own child and seen the enemy? If you've ever had to choose between love and survival, tell me below. Daniel handed me a pen, a silver one, sleek, cold, heavier than I expected. The kind of pen that had witnessed decisions people couldn't take back. "The pen is mightier than tears," he said softly, almost as if to himself. I smiled faintly. "So I've learned." I held the pen above the paper, staring at the blank space where my name would go. My reflection trembled faintly in the metal barrel, older, wearier, but not broken. I remembered Claire's face the last time we spoke, the practiced concern, the gentle tone, the hands that reached for mine while hiding deceit beneath their softness. The way she called me Mom with sweetness that had shape but no warmth. I used to think betrayal came like thunder, but it doesn't. It seeps in quietly disguised as care. My hand hovered. Daniel said nothing. He waited, still respectful, understanding that some decisions must ripen in silence. Outside, I could hear the faint buzz of traffic, the distant call of a bird. Life continued, indifferent, unshaken. But inside me, something aligned like a door clicking shut. I pressed the pen down. The ink flowed smooth and black. My name took shape, slow, deliberate, final. For a moment, I just looked at it. That small trail of ink, proof that a woman who had been silenced by love had finally spoken. Daniel nodded gently. "We'll file this by morning." I exhaled a sound that felt like it came from years ago. "I never thought I'd have to do this," I whispered. He glanced at me, eyes calm but kind. Most people who love deeply never think they will. I left his office with the silver pen still warm in my palm. The city air outside was brisk, biting my cheeks. It smelled of rain and gasoline and something else release. As I walked to my car, I noticed my reflection in a shop window. For the first time in a long while, I didn't look like someone's mother. I looked like someone's witness. That thought frightened me and freed me. The drive home was quiet. The world outside blurred into colors: amber leaves, gray sidewalks, faint streaks of light slipping past the windshield. My hands rested steady on the wheel. My chest no longer burned with anger, only certainty. Truth doesn't roar, it stands. When I reached home, I placed the signed papers in the same wooden box where it all began. The key turned easily smooth and sure. My reflection caught in the silver lock, faint but steady. I sat by the window watching the streetlights bloom against the dusk. The house felt different now, not empty, just awake. The kind of stillness that comes after a storm when the air is heavy but clean. I thought of Claire, the little girl who once braided my hair, who whispered secrets under the blanket, who believed her mother could fix anything. Maybe one day she'd understand that I wasn't punishing her. I was teaching her the cost of crossing a boundary too sacred to break. The pen is mightier than tears. The phrase echoed softly, wrapping around me like a shawl. I picked up the silver pen again, turning it between my fingers. Its weight reminded me of what strength really feels like, not fury, not revenge, but stillness after the decision has been made. If silence remembers, the silence would remember that moment, the click of the pen, the breath that followed the tremor of freedom finally earned. I closed my eyes. Peace didn't arrive with joy. It came like clarity, sharp calm, unflinching. That day I signed my freedom. The knock came just after sunrise, soft, polite, almost apologetic. The air still smelled of rain, the kind that lingers in the soil long after the storm is gone. I opened the door, and there he stood, a man in a gray uniform holding an envelope that looked far too clean for what it carried. He didn't need to say a word, I knew. The paper was heavy, thick, official. Summons to court. Her name was printed beside mine. Claire Lee, plaintiff. Margaret Lee, defendant. Every lie has a due date. I thanked him, closed the door, and placed the envelope on the kitchen table. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. Somewhere outside, a bird called sharp, quick, gone. Then came the phone. It started ringing minutes later, shrill and unrelenting. Again and again. Claire. Her number glowed on the screen, the same number that used to light up my evenings with laughter and small talk. Now it was the sound of chaos wrapped in digits. I didn't answer. Not the first time, not the fifth, not even when it switched from pleading to threatening, from, "Please, Mom, we can fix this," to, "You'll regret this, I swear." The phone shook against the table like it was alive, but silence. Silence was stronger. I poured myself a cup of tea. Chamomile as always. Steam rose like a ghost of calm, and I held it close, breathing in warmth that didn't lie. The window framed my garden wet leaves, trembling petals, the small wooden bench Robert built 30 years ago. That garden had seen everything: births, birthdays, betrayals. Today it was witnessing judgment. Would you have answered? Would you have let her speak? If you've ever held your silence because truth didn't need defending, tell me below. The calls kept coming through the morning. I turned the ringer off, but even then the silence hummed with the echo of her voice. I could almost hear her at 10 years old again, the little girl who used to run barefoot through that same garden, waving her arms and yelling, "Mom, look at me!" And I always did, I always looked. But today I didn't. Instead, I opened the envelope. The words were neat, sterile, indifferent, a list of accusations written in the language of law. Emotional manipulation, financial exploitation, breach of trust. I smiled. It wasn't amusement, it was recognition. She had used my own strength, my patience, my motherhood as evidence against me. The irony was almost art. I traced my finger along her signature. Sharp, confident, unapologetic. So much like mine once was. Every lie has a due date. And hers had just arrived, wrapped in her own handwriting. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking softly beneath me. A cool breeze slipped through the window, brushing against my face like the hand of time itself, cold, inevitable, honest. I thought of what Daniel, my lawyer, had said. This is where it becomes real, Mrs. Lee. Don't speak out of anger. Speak through truth. So I didn't post, I didn't call, I didn't explain. I just waited. Because truth doesn't rush. It waits for the noise to burn itself out. That evening, when the last light of day stretched across the kitchen floor, the phone rang one final time. I let it. I listened to the sound until it faded, until the house became still again. She must have realized by then that silence was my answer. For the first time in months, I slept deeply. Not peacefully, but with purpose. In the days that followed, I began preparing for the hearing. Ironed my blouse, polished my shoes, gathered documents with Daniel's notes in the margins. It felt ritualistic, deliberate, almost sacred. The kind of preparation that isn't about winning, but about reclaiming space that was stolen. I wasn't the frail woman she once saw. I wasn't the background of her story anymore. I was the author of my own ending. When the court date arrived, the morning air carried the scent of cut grass and fear. My fear. But it wasn't paralyzing. It was clean-focused, real. I stood before the mirror, adjusted my collar, and said quietly, "Enough." It wasn't defiance, it was closure. As I stepped outside, the sun broke through the clouds, sharp, honest light spilling across the porch. My old hands looked steady in that brightness. Age hadn't weakened me. It had refined me. Would you have stayed silent too? Would you have let time speak in your place? If you've ever had to face the person who destroyed you with your own calm, share this moment. The drive to the courthouse was quiet. The city moved around me, unaware of the small war unfolding between two people who once shared everything. The mother and the daughter. The giver and the taker. When I arrived, I saw her standing outside, hair-neat posture, proud face, pale beneath the foundation. She didn't look at me right away. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she saw finally the woman she thought she'd buried beneath guilt. Her lawyer whispered something to her, but she didn't respond. Our eyes met for a second. Just a second, but it was enough. The silence between us was deafening. Not hateful, not sorrowful, just inevitable. Every lie has a due date. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension and perfume. I sat still, spine straight, heart steady. I didn't speak first. I didn't need to. The evidence would. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Claire glanced at me, then not as a daughter, but as an opponent. Her lips trembled just slightly, and for a fleeting second I saw the child she once was. But it was gone as quickly as it came. I turned my gaze forward, folded my hands, and waited for truth to begin. Outside, the rain started again, soft and constant, washing the dust from the courthouse steps. Every storm cleanses what it can. Every lie ends where silence begins. She used to call me Mom. Now she calls me Defendant. The courtroom smelled faintly of wood polish and fear, the kind that hides beneath perfume and pressed suits. Morning light poured through tall windows, dust drifting in its glow like slow snow. The air was thick with whispers, low, nervous, rehearsed. I sat at the table, my hands folded in my lap, the papers in front of me trembling only when the air conditioner sighed. Across from me sat Claire, my daughter. Her hair perfectly brushed, her lips painted in the color of restraint. But her eyes betrayed her. They darted quick and restless, searching for control in a room that no longer answered to her. The bailiff's voice broke through the silence. "All rise." And so we did. Every sound, the scrape of chairs, the shuffle of shoes, echoed too loudly. When the judge entered the room, stiffened, like it was holding its breath. I'd imagined this moment 100 times, but never like this. Not with her sitting across from me avoiding my gaze. Not with her lawyer whispering lines into her ear like a puppeteer steadying a trembling hand. Truth doesn't need volume, only courage. When my lawyer Daniel began reading the evidence, I kept my eyes down. I didn't need to watch. I already knew every line, every signature, every transfer that had carved holes into my life. Claire's hand shook as she lifted her water glass. For the first time, I noticed how small she looked. The courtroom light revealed everything makeup couldn't hide: exhaustion, guilt, and something else. Panic. Her attorney tried to object, tried to spin love into leverage, betrayal into confusion. But Daniel's tone stayed steady, factual, merciless. When it was my turn to speak, the courtroom fell utterly still. I stood slower than I used to, but taller than I'd been in years. The witness chair felt cold beneath me, grounding me to the moment. The judge nodded. "You may begin." I took a breath, the kind that empties a lifetime of noise. "I'm not here to punish my daughter," I said quietly. "I'm here to stop her." The words didn't shake. They didn't rise. They just existed like stones placed gently where a wall once stood. A murmur rippled through the room. Claire looked up, her eyes wet but defiant. "You don't understand," she whispered, barely audible. But I did. I understood perfectly. I'd spent my life cleaning up her messes, forgiving before apologies were even formed, mistaking love for obligation. But that morning I realized some lessons can't be taught in comfort. Would you have done the same? Could you look at your own child and still choose truth over mercy? If you've ever stood in that silence, tell me below. The proceedings continued, but time lost its meaning. I heard the rhythm of Daniel's voice, the flipping of pages, the clicking of pens. Yet beneath it all there was something else, the steady heartbeat of justice, patient and unflinching. When Claire took the stand, her composure cracked. Her lawyer asked, "Did your mother ever say she wanted to harm you?" She hesitated. "No." "Did she ever threaten you?" "No." "Then why did you take her money?" Silence. I could see her throat tighten. Her chest rose, fell. The air between us thickened with everything unsaid. Finally, she stammered, because I thought she owed me. There it was, the wound exposed, the entitlement unmasked. Daniel didn't press further. He didn't have to. The truth had already spoken. Claire's tears came then, but they weren't the tears of a daughter broken by regret. They were the tears of someone watching power slip through her hands. I knew that cry. I'd heard it when she was 5, when I refused to buy her the pink dress from the window display. Back then, I told her softly, only special people earn what they ask for. Now I realized I should have told her the rest, that special doesn't mean spoiled. The judge called a recess. The gavel struck once sharp final. Claire turned away, clutching a tissue like a flag of surrender. I stayed seated for a moment, staring at the empty witness chair. The same chair that had once held criminals, now holding the weight of motherhood itself. Truth doesn't need volume, only courage. When everyone left, the silence grew heavy again. Not cruel, not hollow, just true. I thought about how love can blind you, how it makes you defend what destroys you. But courage lets you see clearly, even through tears. If you've ever mistaken silence for weakness, remember this: silence is not the absence of strength. It's the moment strength learns how to breathe. The afternoon light dimmed through the courtroom blinds, stretching across the floor like a fading promise. I closed my eyes and let it touch my face. It felt like warmth returning after a long winter. Claire would face consequences. Maybe she'd change, maybe not. That wasn't mine to decide anymore. My part was over. My truth had been spoken, and it was enough. When the judge returned and read his decision, the room was quiet, almost reverent. The verdict wasn't harsh, it was balanced. Restitution, counseling, accountability, justice without cruelty. I exhaled slowly. The ache in my chest didn't fade, but it softened the way an old scar loses its sting with time. As we stood to leave, Claire glanced back at me one last time. Her eyes didn't ask for forgiveness. They just searched, maybe for the mother she'd lost or the woman she'd never really known. I didn't look away. Outside, the sky was pale gold, the air crisp. The courthouse steps glistened from a light drizzle earlier that morning. I walked down slowly, each step firm, measured, alive. Behind me, the echoes of the gavel still rang, not as punishment, but as balance restored. Justice isn't revenge. It's balance restored. The air smelled different by the sea. Clean, honest, like everything it touched had been forgiven. The mornings came earlier here, the kind that broke softly over the horizon, spilling gold over rooftops still damp with dew. I sat on the porch, a cup of tea, warming my hands, and watched the light crawl across the wooden boards. The house was quiet, but not empty, just resting. Peace grows where fear once lived. That's what I told myself the day I left the city behind. I sold the old house, the one with too many echoes, too many rooms that remembered tears. When I locked that door for the last time, I didn't cry. I just whispered, "Thank you," and let it go. Now the mornings were mine. The court case had ended 2 months earlier. Claire was ordered to return the money, to post a public apology, and to attend counseling. I never asked for punishment, only balance. Justice had done what love alone couldn't. It had stopped the bleeding. When the news broke, people I hadn't heard from in years reached out. Some said I was brave. Others said I was cruel. But no one had lived my silence. No one had felt what it meant to love someone who kept cutting you and to finally say enough. Would you have done it? Would you have chosen peace over blood? If you've ever had to let go of someone to save yourself, tell me below. I moved into this small coastal town the following week. A modest place, 1 story with chipped paint and a wide porch that faced the sunrise. The first night I slept here, I could hear the sea breathing outside the window. It felt alive, like the earth itself was keeping me company. The next morning, I bought soil and flower pots from a local market. The woman who sold them asked if I needed help carrying them to the car. I smiled. "No, thank you. I've carried heavier things." She laughed softly, unaware how true that was. Back home, I knelt on the porch and planted marigolds, lavender, and small white daisies. My knees ached, but it didn't matter. The soil was warm beneath my fingers, real forgiving, alive. Each seed I pressed down felt like a prayer. Peace grows where fear once lived. The days came and went with gentle rhythm. I cooked for myself again, simple meals, slow soups, bread that filled the house with warmth. I played old records in the afternoon, let the curtains dance in the breeze, and read until the words blurred into the sound of the waves. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking of Claire, wondering if she'd changed, wondering if she'd ever drive here, knock on my door, and ask to sit with me on this porch. If that day comes, I'll open the door. But this time, I'll protect the peace I've earned. Because love doesn't mean staying broken. It means knowing when to stop bleeding. I keep her photo on the mantel, not out of nostalgia, but gratitude. She taught me the cost of boundaries, the price of truth, the power of quiet. I used to think motherhood was endless giving. Now I know it's also learning when to stop giving what hurts. If you've ever mistaken letting go for losing, remember freedom is also a form of love. One evening I walked along the shore as the sun dipped low. The sky burned in shades of pink and tangerine colors I hadn't really seen in years. A child ran past me chasing a kite, her laughter trailing behind her like wind-borne joy. For a moment, I saw Claire as that little girl again, barefoot in our old garden, wearing that pink dress I sewed from leftover fabric. She'd spun in circles until she fell, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. That memory didn't hurt anymore, it just glowed. Maybe forgiveness isn't about erasing what happened. Maybe it's about remembering without pain. That night, I sat on the porch again, watching the stars rise one by one. I realized I didn't need a house full of people to feel full anymore. Solitude wasn't punishment, it was peace. Peace grows where fear once lived. The flowers I'd planted weeks before had started to bloom. They stood small but certain, turning their faces toward the morning light. The same light that once terrified me, the same clarity I used to hide from. Now it felt gentle like truth after a long night. I brewed tea just as the first rays touched the horizon. Steam rose in thin spirals carrying the scent of chamomile and renewal. I breathed it in and thought, this is what survival sounds like: the hum of waves, the whisper of wind, the quiet heartbeat of my own chest. Sometimes healing doesn't come in grand gestures. It comes in ordinary mornings, in watering flowers, in cooking alone, and sitting on a porch that no longer remembers the weight of tears. Would you have forgiven? Would you have stayed silent? Or would you have chosen to live again, even if it meant losing what once defined you? The world doesn't tell you this, but justice and love can live in the same room. Justice doesn't destroy love. It purifies it. It burns away the manipulation, the guilt, the masks, until only truth remains. The sun rose higher, gilding the porch, the flowers, my hands. I felt its warmth settle deep inside, not as heat, but as life returning. I didn't lose a daughter. I found myself.